So I come from a mixed race family, and that means that the language that my parents spoke to each other in order to communicate was English. This wasn't very common in my country at that time. Interracial marriage wasn't common, and having a child from an interracial marriage was definitely not common. And so I became one of the few people who grew up speaking English at home and no other language. I started learning my mother tongue, which is Mandarin Chinese, when I was 5 or 6 years old. And by that time, I had a lot of exposure already to different Chinese languages, not only Mandarin. I had exposure to Teochew and Hokkien and Cantonese before I started going to school to learn Mandarin at 5 or 6 years old. We started in kindergarten. So around the same time that we started learning kind of like more advanced English, sentence construction, etc., that's when we started learning how to speak in Chinese Mandarin and how to write words and stuff like that. And what was funny was that I attended kindergarten at a Christian kindergarten, which was like in the building of a church. So I'm literally part of like a faith Baptist church, and they have a kindergarten and they're teaching Chinese Mandarin. And Chinese Mandarin teaching, whether it's in primary school, secondary school, university, or kindergarten, comes with this moral and civic education, which kind of like explains about why we respect elders and also like why we do certain things in Chinese culture, etc. So it's not just language for the sake of language, it's also like the entire history basically of Chinese culture that is baked into this language. And obviously, for different languages, they have different types of histories. Chinese history is a very civilizational based history where it's very kind of like the historical record is very controlled by emperors. And so a lot of phrases that you would have in Chinese is also because it was invented by an emperor, or like something happened to an emperor and that caused them to say this, and it kind of like became a thing that we now commonly say. So it's not very different to, for example, the reason why Spanish people have a lisp, because like some Spanish king started speaking with a lisp because he naturally had a lisp. And so out of respect or endearment or something, all the people in Spain started speaking with a lisp. And that's the reason why today the Spanish accent has a lisp. So it's something kind of related to that, except more regimented. And I don't know if that Spanish king was like, everybody's going to speak with a lisp, just like me. Or I don't know. Maybe he wasn't that doing that on purpose, but definitely the Chinese emperors were doing that on purpose. So obviously language plays an important part of our childhood, and especially our non-hegemonic languages. So such as, like I said, for me, it would be Mandarin Chinese, but I never learned the other languages that were spoken by the other side of my family. And this was just a conscious decision that my family made, and that's kind of how it became. Even today, I'm not really allowed to access that part of my culture or my heritage for various reasons, but mainly I would say it's because also of the language barrier. So there are a lot of consequences that learning languages, especially early in life, have on us. And being in touch with our language can often be the main way that we connect with our culture. I think other ways are also possible, for example, cuisine and religion. But I think without that language as a basis, it just kind of like keeps things watered down, or keeps things sort of like, participating for the sake of being part of a festival or something like that, and not really like in your daily life, being part of the culture. So how do you see language as a form of ethnocide within your context?
In my context, like in Brazil, we normally have as well English and Spanish in school, like the basic. But I think it became English has become more recently more commonly part of our cultures because of direct contact through movies, through video games. So like children learn English more easily and it's more widespread, which was not the case some decades ago, even through social media and all of that. So it kind of facilitated, and now it's much more common to find people in younger generations that speak English, which was not the case some years ago. Like I remember I saw some data that only 5% Brazilian population spoke English. I think now this is also changing the purpose, because before English was seen as a mainly professional context, like something that you need to be able to have a better professional career, where you would be able to go look for a job outside, and maybe have better opportunities.
By outside, do you mean mainly American? Like, so it was kind of an expectation that if you go outside and you speak English, you're probably going to try the US or something?
I think so. Also because the US, I think there are some things that connect uh, more with Brazilians, and there are way more Brazilians living in the US than Europe, especially like I know Orlando, Miami, that region has a lot of Brazilians there, like created a community. It's the biggest community of Brazilians outside of Brazil. I think it is in Orlando because of similar time zone, because it's closer, you have direct flights, like there are a lot of
Oh my
things like that.
God.
But also I think culture, right? Because by being exposed to like movies, and things like that, like there is that connection more with American culture, I think.
But I mean,
um
of course, Spanish itself is a hegemonic language, as is Portuguese. You were never exposed as a child to learn indigenous languages in Brazil. I don't know how many people are today, but I would expect it's quite rare.
yeah, exactly, there are 273, if I'm not mistaken, indigenous languages in Brazil, that and a lot of communities speak their own language, don't speak Portuguese at all. There's the Tupi language that kind of originates a lot of other languages. So it is if you would, a mother tongue of Brazil instead of the Portuguese, that is the language of the Portuguese colonizers, it would be that main language, but we don't learn at all. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And we don't even like, I don't think people even consider that.
Are there like classes that people can sign up for if they want to learn, or is it only kind of if you're in that community, then you would be able to learn it?
I never saw classes available, so I'm not entirely sure, but I think it would be easier to go to the community and learn there. I've never seen something offering like indigenous language courses.
Yeah, I was just curious because there is a Sami creator whom I follow who's quite vocal about the Palestine issue. That's how I found her. And she made a post about 3 years ago or something that just like clicked in my head and just like made everything make sense. She was like, look, just become indigenous. Find a community who's willing to accept you, do the work, and just like become indigenous. Like, what's the problem? And that's the way she said it was just like, just stop participating in harmful Western culture. Like that's kind of like that's the reason why I asked the question, like, are there classes to learn?
Yeah, no, it's very removed. Like the indigenous communities in Brazil are very sidelined. I think there are a lot of prejudice and barriers. So people are not even interested in general. I think there is this thing then when there are indigenous peoples that go to university, for example, which is still not that common, like, but it's starting to happen. And then they are very used as, coin of diversity or something like that. So there are a
Yeah.
lot of problems in there, because there's also a big problem now, both in Brazil, and I also heard that happening in other countries in Latin America, about the younger generations inside indigenous communities not wanting to learn their native language because they are
Yeah.
ashamed and they
Yeah.
want
Or their
to.
parents telling them that, oh, you shouldn't learn this language. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Is it like that in Southeast Asia as
Yeah, it
well,
is very
or?
much like that. Usually it's the parents would tell them that you should focus on going to school and learning English or learning whatever other language, especially the main language of the country. And most parents don't really care about passing on their own language because they don't see it as a economically viable future for their child to learn that language, especially like the rest of the culture that comes with the language. because that would take time away from the child learning something else that would become economically viable for them. It's sad to say that, but it's very few parents who are indigenous who actually want their children to spend time to learn their own cultures and etc. Usually, anyway, like this is also very limited. Even if you want your child to learn your culture by age 11 or 10, you might send them away to like, a further away village to be away from your culture, but to attend school that can get them maybe like a better opportunity, etc. So the child is like living in another village on their own, receiving a small amount of money from their parents every week or something in order to like get food to survive, maybe living with a relative or something like that, and like completely disconnected from their culture from age 12 onwards. And then they are,
Mhm.
they get into all sorts of types of belief systems in school. And they start believing that, well, I want to go and work in the city and, be in an office and, you know, dress in Western office attire and listen to Western music and speak in English, and maybe they'll have a job as a person at a call center or something like that. And well, at least in the Philippines, this is, the world's capital of call centers is Manila. So that's the reason why I use that example. But you get a lot of that kind of thing where people just, because of their young age, being exposed to these things that they're told that they should desire, and they would be very lucky to be able to do that kind of work, and that they'll be comfortable and they can pay rent and they'll be able to live comfortably with, the potential to like meet a nice husband who also has a good salary, and then have babies who never ever live the way that they did as a kid. So in many ways, it happens very young here in Southeast Asia. And I would expect, like, in many, many, many other parts of rural areas in the global south, that that's also the case because of the economic opportunities, not really because they don't want to pass down their culture, but they don't want their children to be engaged in something or distracted, so-called, by
Mhm.
something that would take them away from economic survivability.
Mhm. Mhm.